Hello, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our training. My name is Marzena Cichoń-Balcerowicz, and I'm the lead organizer for the Warm Welcome campaign. We are very much looking forward to having you in our session today. So very special welcome to everyone. So today's session is the second session in our series of training in community organizing. And today we are talking about warm spaces as a space for listening. So how do we listen to people who are part of the warm spaces? So people who run warm spaces, people who volunteer with the warm spaces, but also the guests who come to our warm spaces, and how we can move people into action and developing campaigns on issues that they care about. So welcome everyone to the session. As a few points about the logistics for today before we start. So hello to our team. So we have Ria from the Good Faith Partnership, who is helping us with the tech today. We also have David Barkley, who is the director for the Warm Welcome campaign, and will have a chance to introduce himself and about his hopes for the organizing in the warm spaces. And as I said, I'm Marzena Cichoń-Balcerowicz, and I'm the lead organizer for the Warm Welcome campaign. I work for the Center for Theology and Community. My organizing team today with me is George from Citizens UK. We have Anna and Joe from Center for Theology and Community. And as I said, David will be with us as well. So a few points before we start. Please keep on mute. There will be an opportunity for you to share your reactions and your experiences during the training. And please use chat to introduce yourself and tell us where you are calling from and the name of your warm space. Join breakout rooms to meet other people. So we will have 2 breakout rooms during the session. So please feel free to join and contribute your reactions and plans that you may have based on the training. The meeting is being recorded and we would love you to keep the camera on. It just helps us as trainers to see your faces and be able to connect with you. So thank you very much for joining us today. I can see that there are some more people joining us. We are expecting about 70 people today. So this is the second of our training sessions. The first session that we organized last month was about warm space as a place of connection. So we talked about the difference between running your warm space with the transactional way of running services, and then how we can move into a more relational way of running warm spaces. We talked about one-to-one conversations as a tool to build relationships that are based on trust, and also as an opportunity for us to really understand who we are, what do we care about, but also understanding other people's hopes and dreams and values that bring us together. We believe that there is a great potential with the warm spaces to organize and develop people's agency to help them act on issues that they care about. In this picture, you have an example of some people linked with the warm space in Leytonstone, where I work, who got together to campaign for more lights in the area, because one of the things that they are struggling with is the safety. So today's session is about listening. So we are moving from thinking about how do we build relationships, and we need relationships in order to build power, in order to create change in our community. And today we're going to talk about listening. So how do we listen so that we are able to identify issues that people care about, but also people that we want to work with, and how we can move them to be agents of change rather than recipients of the help and support that we offer through the warm spaces. I will now invite David Barkley to share with us why last year the Warm Welcome campaign decided to run the listening campaign in order to identify the potential of the warm spaces when it comes to making change. The picture that you can see on the PowerPoint slide is from the blog that David wrote on the basis of the meeting that we had in Birmingham, bringing people from warm spaces from across the country. So David, over to you.
Thanks so much, Marzena. Great to be with you all. for those that I haven't met before, my name is David Barclay, and I have the privilege of being the director of the Warm Welcome campaign. Some of you will have been involved in Warm Welcome from the start and will know this story, but just for those that might not, Warm Welcome started back in 2022, in the summer of that year, when it became clear that rapidly rising energy prices were going to leave millions of people in the UK struggling to keep their homes warm during the following winter, and that community organisations were going to need to step up and fill that gap and be places of warmth for people. And so we started Warm Welcome to try and offer support to local organisations to do that well. And we were amazed at the response. We had 7,000 groups that registered with us in our first year in that kind of real crisis context. But one of the key things that we learned last winter was that people came for the warmth, but they stayed for the welcome. And that actually one of the biggest impacts that Warm Spaces had was around tackling loneliness and isolation. And I think that's really important for this conversation, because that ability of Warm Spaces to be places of relationship and dignity for people creates the potential for something really powerful in terms of social change. And we saw that anecdotally start to happen last winter. So some of the spaces in Birmingham, for example, they were building relationships. And as they did that, they kept hearing stories about people that had damp and mold issues in their homes, and that those issues weren't being fixed promptly. People would be emailing the council, but not getting a resolution to their issues. And so the Warm Spaces themselves started to talk to each other and started to talk to the council about that. And they came up with a better solution. They found a director in the council that wanted to take ownership and responsibility for tackling those issues. And they created a bit of a kind of hotline into that director for any issues that emerged through the Warm Spaces. And that really gave us a bit of a vision of saying, if Warm Spaces are doing that organically already, how can we grow that, and how can we support and equip them to do more of that? So that's where a lot of this work really comes from, our thinking about community organising. And I just want to finish with, we had a partner called Liz, who was helping us to think about that and visiting some of the different spaces and talking to people last winter. And she said this: Warm Welcome Spaces immediately see people's dignity. The people who turn up to Warm Welcome Spaces are guests and members. They are not objects of pity, but people, like everyone, who are inherently valuable and have worth. In an economic and political context, which has left some people feeling like they are undeserving or worthless, the working poor or asylum seekers, for example, this gesture is everything. And I think that's a great way into the conversation today about how we can listen well in Warm Spaces and what that might lead on to. Thanks.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, David. And it's a pleasure for us to work with you all. I just looked at the chat and we have people from Newcastle, Cheshire, Manchester, Walthamstow, and many, many different areas in the UK. So you are very welcome to be part of this training. The reason why we are doing it is to share the experience of community organizing, to share some of the stories, how we work with Warm Spaces, to develop the agency of people and think how these places can be co-created and moved into action and change. I would like to invite Anna to share a story about Ilford Salvation Army and how they did the listening with the people experiencing homelessness. So over to you, Anna.
Hello, everybody. I think you met me. If you were here last time, you met me. So I'm Anna Franco Ferreira, and I'm a community organizer, but also researcher. And I've been working with civil society organization for just over a decade. But the story I want to share with you today, it's about some of the work I've done with the Salvation Army in Ilford. So the Salvation Army, the officer there, when I first met John, he told me that he was really tired of being contacted by local businesses, local organizations, local authority, and none of them knowing what to do about the homelessness problem in Ilford. But not only that, the main thing that John was really upset about and angry, really angry about, was the fact that he was being contacted to carry out funerals for people that people didn't know their names. So he had to carry out funeral after funeral, And he was fed up. He wanted to do something about it. So together with his wife, they set up the winter shelter for people that were experiencing rough sleeping in Ilford. So every year, around 20 to 28 people that were sleeping rough would live in the Salvation Army from December to March, because these were the coldest days. And through the experience of people coming to shelter, John found out that the main problem people had, especially those that couldn't really be moved on from the problem, it was the ones that had no recourse to public funds. So people that means people didn't have access to public funds, so to state help. And in the case of those people, this meant they were perpetually in a problem situation. They would potentially be perpetually living in the streets. So the Salvation Army, they were doing that, but they were very good at recruiting volunteers. They had like 7 to 15 volunteers each night. And the community, they were very kind to the shelter and to the guests of the shelter. They were very kind to give the time, to give the energy, and some to give the money. But between the years of 2018 to 2019, around 12 people died, frozen to death in Ilford. And that was really upsetting, especially for the volunteers, and some of those people were guests that would have stayed in the shelter during the winter time. So as a community, they gathered together and they held memorial services to grieve about those that perished in the streets. But also the volunteers, they felt motivated in conducting a listening campaign through what happened, and a specific listening campaign around healthcare, because a lot of the people that were coming to the shelter, they had lots of issues around mental and physical health. So John, Naomi, and the team, they started a listening campaign, and a listening campaign is an opportunity to carry out lots of one-to-ones, what we learned in the last session, and to build relationship with people, but also to listen to their stories. And so when you would do a listening campaign, everybody is on a listening mode. So it means that you're really trying to understand and listen to the people's stories, but also to trust, to learn how to build a relationship with them. So I trained the volunteers. We had lots of conversations about the context in which they're working, and was not a very easy context. So many of the guests, they had mental health issues, English as a second language, and many other barriers like substance abuse. So you can imagine how hard that context was. But the team had although they had many challenges, they went ahead and then did the one-to-ones. So we decided that it would be safer for the team to go in pairs to do those one-to-ones. But we talked about the context first. So we knew that if the guests were not engaged in the conversation, they would have to stop or have lots of mini conversations so people would engage. So we did talk about it before that happened, because we know it was a difficult context. But following those series of conversations, people were brought up to a house meeting, and you're going to learn more about house meeting later on today. Joe is going to be telling us about what house meeting is. But during that meeting, a house meeting is just a meeting. So during that meeting, people came together, and the guests mentioned that this was the first time they felt they were heard and listened, and they felt hopeful, because people really listened to their stories, not just to tell them what to do, but really listen to what they were going through. And as a result, 23 guests were involved in the one-to-one conversation, the listening campaign. And they found out, so the findings of this listening were that there were challenges around hospital discharges. There were lots of challenges around mental health support, and challenges around alcohol and drug support. And the main one was the lack of support for GP services for the people with an RPF, with non-recourse public funds. So the Salvation Army shelter could have made a decision for people and said, well, they're not ready to engage in this project. They're not ready to be, they have lots of issues. It's very hard to engage with them. They could have made that decision for people, but they didn't. They decided differently. They worked with volunteers and the guests, and they listened to each other, and that was groundbreaking. So later on, not only the volunteers, but also the guests, they were involved in conversations with the NHS Trust, with local authority and other stakeholders to explore how to set up a free GP clinic and the other conversations around mental and physical health. So by giving the opportunity to listen to people, being those volunteers, beneficiaries, guests, whoever you're working with, and building a trusted relationship with them, we learn things about ourselves, but also about people that we probably wouldn't have otherwise. So people not only become aware of the problem, but they also become part of the solution. And I just want to finish the story with a statement from the report that was published. You can see in the image on the PowerPoint. There was a report published in 2019. And I just want to finish with a statement from the volunteers that says, we volunteers at the shelter are motivated by our relationship with guests. We have seen that life on the streets takes its toll on people's mental and physical health. We have also experienced the death of 12 people facing street homelessness in Redbridge since 2018. It is with sadness that many of those lives have been guests at the shelter and were known well by volunteers. This has given us the reason to pause, to reflect, and more to desire to help. During shelter, we try to provide a space where people can feel known, where they can find some peace and support. In the shelter, we aim to try to hear the guests so they have a voice. And I think I'll just leave at that. Thank you. And I guess I welcome George and Nora now. Thank you.
Thanks for passing over, Anna. That, yeah, it's a really powerful point to leave it on, to take up the reins there. But everyone, you might have met me last week. I'm George. I'm an organizer in Waltham Forest, and I've been working in warm spaces for the last year or so. I saw them as, really important pillars, of the community, and exactly the place that I wanted to be working as a community organizer. And a thing at Citizens UK that we say that's really important, it's kind of one of the foundations of our work, is, that it's people before program. So we go into the community not with a predetermined plan of what we're trying to achieve, but we go in to listen to people, hear what their issues are, and not have assumptions about what they might be, because that may vary between particular groups that we identify as having the same ideas. There's lots of different things that can come out of it. But I'm going to hand over to my colleague Nora. We're very lucky to be joined by Nora today, who has been running one of the warm spaces called Stafford Hall. And she's going to give us the background and tell us the story of what happened in Stafford Hall. And then I'm going to come back and pull out a few little things and talk about some of the actions that emerged out of the work that happened in Stafford Hall. So I'll pass over to Nora. So if you could come in, that would be great.
Sorry about that. Hi, I'm Nora, and I'm one of the coordinators of the Stafford Hall of St. Barnabas Church, one welcome space in Walthamstow. So I'll read our story, and if you don't understand it, I think you'll get the script as well. So one of our church wardens was selected as the London Borough of Waltham Forest Voluntary Community Sector Lead for the Borough of Sanctuary. Additionally, the Council commissioned Citizens UK to deliver community organising training. Around the same time, the Council informed us that 400 people seeking asylum would be arriving at local hotels within walking distance from St. Barnabas Church, where Stafford Hall is located. Our church, along with other voluntary sector organisations and Waltham Forest citizens, work together to support the residents of the Asylum Hotel. We conducted community outreach and organised training sessions for the residents in the Stafford Hall, enabling us to engage in one-to-one conversations with them. We aim to meet the needs of our friends as much as possible. Through listening sessions with our church leaders, we discovered that the residents desired space to relax, cook food, and do homework. Many of them, including families, were living in hotel rooms with limited access to communal areas. Recognizing their preference for meat, we organized cultural food sessions where we grilled meat with the residents while they prepared the sides and the salads. This initiative continued throughout the summer. Additionally, one of the mothers led a homework club in which children and parents from the hotel had a space to read, play board games, and do homework once the children returned to school. All the activities in Stafford Hall were co-designed and co-produced in collaboration with the residents from the hotel, highlighting the importance of the relationships built through one-to-one conversations and listening sessions. Stafford Hall Community Living Room and Warm Welcome Space started off when I received an email from the Waltham Forest Council offering to fund VCS and faith groups funding to help for utility bills and provisions for a winter warm space. Simultaneously, we had a PCC meeting about outreach and stewardship. Months prior to, St. Barnabas Church agreed to take part or was chosen to be part of CTC Organising for Growth. The component part was to conduct one-to-one conversations or develop a deeper relationship with members of the congregation and the community. Also develop lay leaders. I saw this funding as an opportunity, hence I conferred with the church warden if I can take the project as my ministry. My intention was to offer our space to the community and the congregation, a common ground to socialize, spend time with each other, resulting to one-to-one conversations, nurture a deeper relationship with each other, and at the same time, welcome members of the non-church community. Unbeknownst to us, the neighborhood group was in the process of setting up a food pantry in collaboration with Hornbeam, a food distributor. However, they do not have a space, so they approached us to our PCC secretary. That was the inception of Stafford Hall as a winter warm space in collaboration with our local neighborhood group, with a food pantry on site sponsored by Hornbeam. Community and church volunteers literally rushed to renovate the hall, making it a welcoming space. We officially opened second week of January 2023. We continued our venture throughout the first and second round of funding. However, at some stage, our partner in the community expressed her concern about being identified with the church. Upon reflection and moving forward, we recognize it's important to establish clear communication with partners, outline expectations, and regularly evaluate collaborations to prevent any potential misunderstanding. Regardless, we carried on with the community living room, and we have since offered free community activities, parent care under fives, healthy activities such as walking for the elderly during the week, free community yoga, and exercise classes. We currently host a monthly drop-in session for heat in response to the energy crisis. We have started soup Sundays in response to an identified need beyond hot drinks and biscuits, and hoping that we could offer a 3-course meal at some stage as well. So that's our story of Stafford Hall.
Thank you, Nora. Thank you so much for sharing that. There's so much there. It's really, really rich. And also, I just want to, highlight that it's not always easy as well. There's definitely challenges that emerge, as you mentioned. And so that's a part of the story too. But I think the relationships that were built, had such a strong foundation for it. I've only got a couple of minutes, so I'm going to be quite brief. But I wanted to just pick up on one of the elements that Nora was talking about, and that's particularly the work with asylum seekers. Now, unfortunately, what happened a month ago in Waltham Forest is that these hotels were given notice with less than a week's time that they were going to be closed. And that, caused so much anxiety and stress for a lot of the residents who, had become a really big part of the community and gone and visited Stafford Hall. And there was a coordinated public action that emerged out of this, combining Warm Spaces, Citizens UK, CTC, in order to try and stop the eviction. And I think, the two key points that I want to draw out of, what we've been talking about and what we've heard from Nora is that, the listening to people's needs was really important in helping to improve the service and helping people to feel safe and comfortable and cared for and part of the community. And that provided a foundation, those strong relationships, that when an emergency situation occurred, they were primed and they were ready to come out and take action and do something. Now, unfortunately, we didn't stop the eviction. It wasn't as easy as that, but we did get some concessions. So initially, people were sent all over the country, or planned to be sent over the country. That changed so no one was sent outside of London. And also through this process, lots of people have been activated and are really feeling passionate about this issue. And so there's been teams that have emerged, and we're now working towards a housing charter so that there's minimum requirements for housing for asylum seekers that is better than the ones that currently exist. So I think there's a lot of this is sort of showing how listening, building strong relationships in a place like Stafford Hall has led to action when an emergency situation does occur. And there's lots of exciting work that's come out of it. I'm going to leave it there. I'm going to pass it to Joe, I believe, who's going to continue talking about warm spaces. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, George. It's great to see so many people today. And yeah, as George said, I'm going to be talking about kind of making our warm spaces a space for kind of collective listening. So last session, I spoke about the difference between a transactional and relational culture. We made the argument that the dominant culture we live in as a society is a transactional one. So this is where achieving targets and the means by achieving those targets is of most importance. And this often happens at the expense of people, of ordinary people. We argued that in our warm spaces, we want to kind of go against the grain and create a more relational culture. So in this space, individuals themselves are intrinsically valued, and building relationships with one another is actually the main focus of the space. And Anna spoke about how this was done, and she went into the tool of the one-to-one. And so the collective space that we want at our warm welcome is built through these one-to-ones that Anna spoke about. And these one-to-ones reveal to us the things we have in common with people. So without one-to-ones, things would remain at a very surface level, and we might struggle to find things that actually unite us. But through the one-to-ones, I don't know if you remember Anna speaking about this, but through our one-to-ones, we actually connect at a deeper level, and they allow us to form connections that circumvent the surface level. So we're trying to go into that deeper level. And again, a big part of that is listening. Anna mentioned it with the Salvation Army, the intentional listening, which I think is really important. And so in the context that I'm working at St. Martin's Church, we've got 3 different congregations speaking 3 different languages, and all of them coming from many different countries. And from an outsider looking in, that might seem like how you meant to find things in common there, like how you meant to build relationships. But again, through the one-to-ones, we've really managed to build these deep, effective relationships. And people have shared with us what they struggle with, what they hope for, and what brings them joy. And through this mutual sharing, a community has been built. And now in this community, because we're all so deeply connected, we've realized that if we want individual change, then actually we need collective change. And that's because we've moved from that individualistic framework that we spoke about in the transactional kind of culture. We've moved from this individualistic framework to a collective one, through that relationality, through that relational space. And in this space, true justice and joy and celebration is only possible if it's experienced by everyone. If it's experienced by one person, it's not the true form of what it could be. And I think a good example of this, one that we can really wrap our heads around, is food. And it shows kind of a very collective of people coming around it, because you get some people who are passionate about food waste, and then you've got other people who have to use food banks as a way to get by. But for both of these groups, for different reasons, it's in their self-interest to address how we can distribute food more justly. And so through that, you can actually, again, through these one-to-ones and by building a community, you can bring together a group of people who, let's be honest, are probably from very different social economic backgrounds, but we've still then built this kind of collective power of how can we change how food is distributed. And that's just to say that as a collective, we're then more powerful than if we were just doing this by ourselves. So more in terms of the kind of practicalities. So the process of bringing this move from the individual to the collective, we have a tool that we use called the house meeting. So the house meeting is a structured meeting of people from our warm spaces We're a meeting to discuss a single specific issue that leads to practical steps. That's really important. That we know if one thing is being discussed, that could be anything, and it's going to bring about practical steps. And so it's different from a normal meeting, because I think a lot of us would have been and attended to meetings where we're discussing these kind of issues. The ways it's different is that you should know most of the people that are coming, because you've had one-to-ones with them. So actually you're personally inviting them. It's not like you're giving out a leaflet and you're saying like, there's going to be this meeting on this day, like please come. Like you're actually, through this relationship you built, you're inviting these people personally. Should be around 12 to 16 people, so it's not a huge meeting. And from it, next steps become clear. So the direction we want to move in together as a community should become clear from this house meeting. And expanding on that, is a place where change really happens. In this house meeting, there should be a change. So we move from the individuals where we've had these one-to-ones, and it's still kind of a bit individually connected, to then a collective narrative where our story kind of becomes one. And for this to happen, everyone needs to contribute in the house meeting. And the best way we find to do this is with a rounds. And so everyone's given a couple minutes to answer kind of a basic question, but it invites everyone into the room and everyone feels included. So again, sticking with that food example, it could be like a simple question, just like why do you care about food? And again, that's going to give people going to have different answers to that. People are going to hopefully share some of their stories as to why they care about food, and that kind of starts that process of building a collective narrative. And I think that's why we use the term house meeting, because it should feel like you're in a home, in a house where you feel comfortable sharing part of yourself, and you feel like you're treated with value. A colleague, a friend, kind of brought this up in a training course that we're in, that the atmosphere he likes to create in his meetings is a safe space and a brave space. So it should be that you feel that you can share, that you want to share, and that is created in the atmosphere of the meeting. And then in many other ways, the house meeting is similar to other things you might have attended. So there's still a chair, a note taker, a timekeeper. Timekeeper being quite important because that's the way. Time is one of the things that we can give away, but we need to be respectful of that. People live very busy lives, and we don't want to kind of be taking a mick, I suppose, with people's time and their commitment. So if we say the meeting is going to be an hour, then the meeting's an hour. And like the session we're doing today, we've said it's going to finish at 1, and it's going to finish at 1 because we're trying to be respectful of your time. So that is the house meeting. The next slide, we've kind of got a kind of flow chart of kind of the things that I've just been through, maybe in the other way. Okay, I didn't move them around, that's my fault. But so we start again, just a real quick recap. So start from a period of self-reflection. We're internally kind of looking at ourselves. What do I care about? What do I value? What makes me tick? How do I understand joy, justice, all these kind of things? Why do I do the things that I do? Why am I part of these institutions? Then take that into our one-to-ones that we have with people in our warm space, in the hope that it builds a connection and a relationship between the two of us. We then do a listening within our warm space, but then also externally. So what other institutions in our local area do I need to be in contact with? I brought up the example of food, like what other food banks are there in our local area? What other food distributors are there in our local area? How can we learn from them and speak with them? Then draw this all together and have our kind of collective meeting, our house meeting. And then again, from that, we want to create a collective story. And I've got 2 minutes, so I'll give you a very brief example of this. So at St. Martin's Church, we had a meeting about how we needed to transition from a food bank to a food pantry. So I'd done one-to-ones with people at the food bank. It was clear that something needed to change. And I did one-to-one with a leader who was volunteering there, who personally used the food bank, and it had been very transformative to them. And them sharing that story to me had a real big impact on me. Like it really, I came away from it being like, wow, that was amazing. And so I knew that if she shared that story in a collective meeting, in a house meeting, other people would have that same feeling, people who are maybe a bit unsure or hesitant about the concept of food banks because they maybe had never seen it in the flesh. And so at this house meeting, she shared her testimony, and it was very powerful. It really transformed the room. Last thing I'm going to say, in the middle of that flow chart, says be creative. Please, 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 people, be creative. Yeah, you can, we're trying to move away from these boring meetings where people say, oh, point of order, blah, 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 blah. Like, please, like, have some food, do it over activities, like, do it over games. Like, please, be creative in how you want to do this and how you want to bring people into the room. I'm going to stop there. Pass back to Marjana.
Thank you very much, Joe. And thank you, everyone, for all your contributions. I think we had quite a few very inspiring stories where you can see there is a transformation happening on the individual level, but also on the collective level. And the way we listen really impacts how we work with people. And we wanted to give you examples where listening to people who may not be our usual people we listen to really helps us to identify issues that we care about and where we can organize people into collective action. And I think other thing that is really important for us that we want to stress out is developing agency of people. So when Anna was giving an example of people experiencing homelessness, they were part of the action team, they were part of the campaign. So they were in a meeting with CCGs, meeting with other public health bodies to share the experience of what it means to be homeless on the streets, where your status may be irregular and you don't have any access to health. And it really helped them to identify what was the root cause of people dying on the street. So the vulnerability of people, but also the bravery of people, of them stepping into a public space to share their story and be in a room where we challenge people in power to deliver things for us that we know are the solutions to the real problems. And similar with how the Stamford Hall used the listening to co-create the space, and people who volunteer, people who come to this space started cooking together. So that was the community building element and creating this pockets of power. So when we say that in organizing, you need power in order to make change, it's about building these relationships that you can then build on when the crisis happens. So the story of the asylum seekers and the crisis that happened with people getting a notice of eviction, we were able to pull that action together because of the existing relationships in the community. And it takes time, it requires slow and patient work, but that really makes a difference and makes change to people's lives. I encourage all of you to come to our drop-in session next week, because next week we want to unpack it a bit more and think together with you how we can use warm spaces for listening and for reaching out to other people to help us create the services that we deliver, but also thinking about how we can move people from just using the service, but also to becoming agents of change and acting on some of the issues that we are working on. So a few things to catch up with you and summarize for this training. So the house meeting that Joe talked about, it enables you to identify leaders and stories which can help you develop a team and lead to action. We will send you a handout, a 2-page handout, which gives you some guidance on what is a house meeting and how you can organize it. So think about being creative with that. So sometimes we do it over a meal. Sometimes we do it with some arts and crafts or some games. So for some people who may not be as comfortable sharing straight away, we do it through some kind of activity that helps them to open up. Think about people for whom English may not be their first language. So if you know someone from within the community that can help and translate, that makes your listening more inclusive as well. And one thing that we already said in the training, but I would love to reiterate, is creating safe spaces, but also brave spaces. So I think warm spaces with the values of connection, dignity, we do that really well. But what we would like to see more is how are we brave in these spaces? And we start with ourselves and sharing our stories, being vulnerable in this space, but also inviting other people to share the story that they have and doing it with dignity. I think what I always find very transformational, having worked in this space for nearly 20 years is how, by telling people, sharing your story and then hearing to others people's story, very often this is the moment for them when they realize that they may not have all the resources in their life, but they are resourceful and they can make change and they can develop things for themselves and be part of a joint initiative in their community. So thank you very much, everyone, for today. The drop-in session is happening next week. So it's on 28th of February, Wednesday, between 12 and 1 p.m. Thank you very much. We would love to invite you as well to come to the session in March, where we are going to talk about action. So taking listening into the action. So thank you very much for joining us today, and I'm looking forward to seeing you again.